Talent opportunities, a legal and policy forecast, and update on hiring global talent. We have a tremendous panel of speakers who you will hear from today. I'm Karen Philippi, Director of New American Integration with the Office of Global Michigan with the state of Michigan, and I'll be the moderator for today. I'd like to start by thanking Global Detroit and Steve Tabachman for their efforts in putting this webinar together. I'd also like to say a big thank you to our co-sponsors, including the Detroit Regional Chamber, Fakuri Global Immigration, SafeArth, the Center for Automotive Research, the Michigan Venture Capital Association, the Grand Rapids Chamber, Michigan Compact on Immigration, Cincinnati Compass, St. Louis Mosaic, Mich Auto, Global Cleveland, Mich Bio, the Louisville Office for Globalization, the Champaign County Economic Development Corp., and the Welcoming Center in Pennsylvania. We'll begin today with some questions that I have prepared for our panel, and then there'll be a general question and answer session toward the end of our time together. We ask that you please put any questions in the chat, and that will be monitored throughout, although we'll probably do the bulk of the questions near the end. Also, everyone will be muted upon entry. We ask that you please stay on mute throughout the time of the webinar. Now for a little bit about our panelists today. Stuart Anderson is the Executive Director of the National Foundation for American Policy, a nonpartisan public policy research organization focusing on trade, immigration, and related issues based in Arlington, Virginia. Previously, Stuart served as the Executive Associate Commissioner for Policy and Planning and Counselor to the Commissioner at the then named Immigration and Naturalization Service. Rami Fakuri is the founder and managing director of Fakuri Global Immigration USA, one of the largest independently owned business immigration law firms in the US, and is based in Troy, Michigan. FGI embodies Rami's lifelong belief in the vital contributions that immigrants make to America's economy and society, advances his goal of helping businesses and organizations meet their talent mobility needs, and assists talented and ambitious individuals in realizing their career aspirations. Jeff Landy is the founder and president of Landy Group LLC, a Washington, D.C. government affairs firm. Jeff previously served as Executive Vice President of Tech America and Senior Vice President of the Information Technology Association of America. He has played a prominent role in the formation of both the U.S.-India High Technology Cooperation Group and the U.S.-India Information and Communication Technology Working Group. Angelo Paparelli is a national expert on immigration law, having decades of practical experience. He is a partner at SafeArth Shaw and is based in Los Angeles, California, although he lived in Michigan for many years and is a proud graduate of the University of Michigan. He is the founder and past president of the Alliance of Business Immigration Lawyers, which is a global association of leading business immigration lawyers. Suzanne Sierra is senior program manager for St. Louis Mosaic. She manages community programs and initiatives which focus on the Mosaic Project's goal of transforming St. Louis into the fastest growing major metropolitan area for immigration by 2025. This includes collaborating with business and university leaders and community partners to provide professional and social connections to foreign-born individuals, professionals, and entrepreneurs. All right, let's get started. Stuart, why is this discussion about global talent important? Can you provide some context for us for today?
Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me here. And I think the context that's often missed when we talk about issues like H-1B visas is that an H-1B visa is often the only practical way for a foreign national, including an international student, to be able to come to the United States and to stay here on even a semi-permanent basis, never mind have a chance in their mind to get a green card and become a U.S. citizen. And so when we look at the immigration process, we have to remember we're talking about people's lives, and these lives, through their contributions, end up benefiting Americans. When you look at international students, you see up to 80% of the full-time graduate students in fields like electrical engineering and computer science are foreign nationals, are international students. When you look at entrepreneurship, research or organizations found that more than half of the billion-dollar startups in America had at least one immigrant founder. So when you look at the big picture and the small picture in terms of people's lives and the big picture for the US economy and for employers' access to talent, they need to be able to navigate the US immigration system. And as we'll hear more about shortly, that's been a very difficult proposition over the past 4 years or even longer.
Thank you so much, Stuart. And Suzanne, did you have anything you wanted to add about the kind of big picture discussion about global talent?
Yes, thank you also for inviting me to be part of this panel. It's a really important topic. And you know why it's important? Because companies need workers. Companies of all levels need to hire talent of a variety of different skills. And so, you know, we need to make sure that the policies and the laws make it make it possible for our foreign-born to come in here. And then we need to do what we can to be thoughtful and deliberate about matching talent to the jobs and working with our universities to make sure that they're preparing the students. So it's very much, as we were saying in the pre-planning, you know, it takes a village, as we all know, and it takes a village to help our economies grow. And without immigration, our economies are not going to grow. So it's imperative, it's critical that we're doing everything we can, you know, from top to bottom, bottom up to make sure that talent can come here, that they know that they're welcoming, that we're telling them we see them, we hear them, we want to help them, because that helps all of us.
Great. Thank you to Stuart and Suzanne for providing that context for today. So to start to dig in a little bit, Rami, what would you say happened either in 2020 and or during the past administration in general that really made an impact on employment-based immigration and also international students?
Sure. You know, actually, it's no secret, and I think that some of the people that were in the Trump administration wanted to make immigration very inconvenient and difficult, and they certainly did. I believe there are approximately 1,065 immigration-related actions that were promulgated between 2017 to 2021. Some actually, of course, came through and were somewhat reasonable, I guess, related to COVID in terms of you know, certain travel restrictions. But there were others that were disguised, I feel, like restricted the entry of certain immigrant visas that was issued in April 2020. Also for non-immigrants in June 2020. There are other issues related to national security that are probably legitimate, but of course in the very beginning you also had the Muslim ban. But I think that what happened for the most part, and we had this discussion before, regardless of party, I think America's always been a country that welcomes people, welcomes immigrants. I mean, from Alexander Hamilton, who's done amazing things for this country all the way through, to even Zoom that we're using today, came in as immigrants. And so I think with where the world is today in terms of Canada, Australia, Germany, even the UK, even after Brexit, are offering many more liberal immigration restrictions for the most part, for at least talented or educated people. We are in a true competition for global talent. And I still think we are ahead of most other countries and most people want to come here. But I do hear in my private practice of people that aren't interested in coming to the United States. Unfortunately, the last 4 years have been pretty devastating, I think, for the image of America, at least around the world. In terms of foreign students, Canada, as I mentioned to you, I think just in the last 2 years increased the number of Indian nationals from around 78,000 to 176,000. It's 100,000 more students that ended up going to Canada. There are Canadian universities recruiting right out of Michigan that I'm well aware of, and I know the numbers, I don't want to get into too many specifics. But it was pretty shocking to see that other countries are actually recruiting foreign students from US universities. But I think that, again, the process that we have worked for a long time, but it needs to be updated. It's severely lacking. It's unpredictable. It's extremely difficult. I welcome some of the things that we see that the Biden administration has already done or proposing in terms of making it more transparent, open, predictable, and welcoming. I think these are all very critical because our other competitor nations are all doing the same thing, including, by the way, China, which is trying to recruit back many of its nationals and Chinese nationals and very talented people as well. So I think the way that we need to proceed going forward Also, in a much bigger discussion, you have 10,000 people retiring a day. We have an aging population. There are other dynamics that are occurring in America that immigration really is the way to kind of resolve a lot of this. And clearly we want an orderly and legal system that works and is transparent for corporations and individuals that are going to be spending the most important years of their lives working or giving back to the community or creating some great new company, as I mentioned to you, as we are using Zoom here today. But basically, what happened in the past 4 years, the number of requests for evidence, these are more or less statements issued by USCIS to ask for more information, increased by about 78%. There was a decoupling of the H4 for H-1B candidates' family, which made it much more difficult, lengthier, and caused gaps in legal status sometimes, or work authorization and others. There's been an increase in filing fees by 20%. The premium processing is more or less almost doubled to $2,500. Then there are also all sorts of administrative items that were thrown in, similar like the public charge, where you would ask an employer, someone that's being sponsored by an employer with a college degree, to demonstrate that they have the financial wherewithal. They're not going to be dependent on the system later on, which was really kind of a real waste of time of the private sector and individuals and talented individuals, especially when you look at countries like Germany and others that are basically giving residency to people that complete their university system with a master's in STEM, et cetera, or Canada, which is making it a lot easier for people students to stay there after they've completed their schooling. So for us to add these really kind of ridiculous obstacles really hurts the national interest of this country, and I think sends the bad message, I think, to the rest of the world. I do want to remind everyone that the international student addition to our economy is approximately 38 billion. This past year, we lost about 1.8 billion. The number of students enrolled is down by like 43%. And part of that, of course, is related to COVID, but clearly, I think the message from our top leadership has not been welcoming, open, and transparent. And so I think that's had a big impact. In fact, you hear more and more companies that are actually opening offices in other countries so that they have access to a pool of talent. And so that is a national economic threat and security threat. And I know Stuart and Jeff Landy and others write a lot about this, but I really do feel it's not only an economic matter, it's a matter of national security. You want the best and brightest here. I think President Reagan at the time with the Soviet Union allowed many people with PhDs in physics and others to enter the United States and obtain residency.
Yes, sir.
Look at something like that as well.
Thanks, Remy. Can I just briefly remind everyone, please mute yourself on the phones. We are hearing some folks having outside conversations, so please make sure you're on mute. Thank you so much. And thank you, Rami, for that. Angelo, are there other areas where you see there's been an impact on immigration? I know we've talked before some about entrepreneurs and the consular posts, et cetera. What are some details around those that you would say have made an impact on immigration?
Sure. And thank you. I want to mention, Karen, that I would be remiss if I did not affirm my allegiance to Wayne Law School, where I graduated in 1976. So thank you for inviting me. Let me talk about three discrete topics quickly. One is the entrepreneurial parole rule that began during the Obama administration. I don't want to say that I was particularly prescient, but I criticized that in a blog post because of its unworkability. And a subsequent study has proven, and all of these materials will be available after the webinar, where you'll be able to get links and drill down with as much information as you may want. It has proven that the rule has not worked. Some of the requirements are quite unwieldy. They're particularly the requirement that there be at least 250,000 from qualified U.S. investors with established track records. Well, that has proven to be a rabbit hole of difficult proof of source of funds, and there have been recommendations that the agency issue a memorandum to soften the regulations, for example, to consider that if someone qualified as an SEC accredited investor under the securities laws, then that should be a clean way of confirming source of funds. The other problem with it is, frankly, parole is a very tenuous status. It's in the United States by the grace of the administrative agency. And it was limited in time to 30 months initially, and then another 30 months with an extension. But unfortunately, Customs and Border Protection, a unit of the Department of Homeland Security, even shortened the admission period. So businesses are not going to invest in terms of these kinds of numbers and find out that a key employee who has received parole is not going to be able to renew it or has gotten a shortened time period. The other part of it is that parole provides no immediate and direct avenue under this program to get a green card through adjustment of status. The next thing we've seen is the closure of consular posts around the world as a result of COVID. And of course, that is understandable. Stuart wrote an article just yesterday that talked about that, and I'm sure that you'll find that of interest. But it wasn't just the closure of consular posts. It was the various visa and entry bans that the the Trump administration had imposed, which created a whole new body of law called national interest exceptions. And those have changed over time. It's been quite confusing about which ones are operative, which ones have been removed, which ones have a particular decreed standard of what it takes to qualify. And even most recently, as last month, there have been changes that make it more difficult for senior executives and managers to come to the United States, let alone startups. And the next thing I think I should draw your attention to is an administrative litigation brought by the Trump administration, but continuing under the Biden administration against Facebook. And without getting into the merits of what Facebook may or may not have done, the administrative litigation is a part of the Immigrant Employee Rights Division of the Justice Department, which has a Protecting U.S. Workers initiative. And they perceive that there are many employers who abuse the temporary work visa programs that deprive U.S. workers of missed job opportunities. And the reason that this is particularly troubling is that it attacks the way that rather the Department of Labor has established for employers to sponsor foreign workers under the so-called PERM labor certification program. And that program deviates from the original statutory intent, where it was the Department of Labor that was supposed to prove whether there were any available, willing, and able U.S. workers. So American employers must prove that and must follow very discrete and particularized requirements. And those are what are coming under attack in this administrative litigation. So by merely complying with the Department of Labor requirements, which are really not reflective of modern day recruitment practices. After all, the worker has already been identified in most instances, is already employed, and there is a test of the labor market that does not require the hiring of any workers. And in fact, under a principle known as diversion, would preclude a labor certification from being granted. So this disregard of key elements of the PERM process mandates that employers take another look at how their real-world recruitment practices may be deviating from the program. I might point out that a colleague of mine, Cyrus Mehta, in his insightful immigration blog, wrote a great December 7th, 2020 article on that lawsuit. So Karen, that's what I would point out.
Great, thanks, Angelo. And you brought up a good point too, just about immigration litigation broadly, or at least it makes me think of that. So, could you maybe at a high level let the group know kind of how the cases have been viewed by the court that have been brought in from the immigration perspective, and whether or not we believe that immigration litigation is going to continue on into the Biden administration? I know it's some forecasting there, but what are your thoughts about
Sure.
the litigation that's already happened and what we might foresee coming?
Well, I would talk about two kinds of litigation. One is impact litigation that affects a large number of people and leads to favorable settlements where the Trump administration lost repeatedly. The public charge rule was defeated, as well as rules dealing with the visa and entry bans that had been imposed. But then on another level, there are individual actions brought by employers and less frequently by foreign nationals who have sought to overturn unreasonable decisions under the Administrative Procedure Act. And remarkably, USCIS has lost a great many of those, never through or rarely through actual hearing on the merits, but rather through a settlement process where the agency just caves in and does not dispute the finding and overturns itself. So those litigation efforts have continued, and they are continuing indeed under the the Biden administration. I foresee that they will continue still, because unfortunately there are many flaws to the immigration system. It is a complex system that has been described as among the most complicated, second only to the Internal Revenue Code. So it is not unusual then for administrative agency officials to misinterpret the law, apply it incorrectly to the facts, and litigation ensues.
Great, thank you, Angelo, for that context. That was helpful. Hey, Jeff, we've talked about what the the prior administration and some of the impact that has made on immigration. What has the Biden administration been able to accomplish administratively so far that might have been starting to reverse some of those negative impacts?
Sure. Great. Thanks, Karen. Thanks for the opportunity to join you today. Let me just start by tagging on to what Angelo was saying. Also, because some of that litigation does flow into what the Biden administration is doing, and a number of business associations have been successful in challenging key decisions of the Trump administration, where they pushed out regulation in clear violation of the Administrative Procedures Act. So those are continuing, the suits are continuing on the merits as well, but the courts have granted pretty broad injunctions exempting the class of individuals who belong to those associations from, for example, the suspension of entry that was in place on non-immigrant visas. So we're going to see that continue. With regard to the here and now, there are a lot of people in the business community and the immigrant advocate community that have been disappointed by what they see as a slow pace of the Biden administration undoing a lot of the harm that the Trump administration had done. For those who may share that view on this webinar, a couple things that I'd encourage you to think about is, one, it does take a while for an administration to staff up. Many of the key positions that the administration has have not been nominated, even let alone confirmed. The Biden administration came in and unbelievably was surprised by what happened along the southern border. So that has distracted them. There's been a fair amount of political pushback on some of the openness the Biden administration has on immigration, both from opponents on the Hill as well as from some of the labor unions and others. Although I think the labor unions and the immigrant communities are much closer than they had ever been before. There certainly is room for everyone to work together. The Trump administration also took a fairly unilateral approach to many policies. And as Angelo and Stuart talked about, they pushed things out either in violation of the APA or under emergency authorities that they argued that they possessed. The Biden administration is going back to the rule of law and deferring to the legislative branch on some of this. For example, on Dreamers and some of the others, they're saying that a solution has to be done legislatively as opposed to Biden just taking the authority himself to push things through. But things that the Biden administration has done, first week in office, they repealed the travel ban for Muslims. They revoked the Buy American, Hire American executive order and replaced it with a refined order. They said that they were going to halt the movement to rescind the granting of work authorizations to H-4 spouses of certain H-1Bs. They've postponed the issuance of the Department of Labor regulations that would determine an entirely new and, in my mind, crazy formula for prevailing wage. Stewart did a brilliant piece talking about how out of whack that would have been with actual market wages. They have pushed back also the new regulation that would prioritize the award of H-1Bs based upon wage levels paid. They rescinded the ban that was in place on the entry of certain immigrants. They did not rescind the ban that was in place on the entry of certain non-immigrants. I would say that they did not do that, bowing to political pressures, because they knew that that ban was expiring on March 31st. So that was about a 2-week delay for that one. So in their mind, there was kind of no harm, no foul. They're also thinking through a lot of additional things that should be done. We've been on the phone with many of the members of the administration talking about what additional pushback has to happen. There are policies that were put in place by the Trump administration, for example, ending the longstanding practice of giving deference to prior adjudicatory decisions and taking each and every petition as though it was a new petition and re-adjudicating every aspect of it. They're giving a long and hard look at what they should do about that, and I believe that they will rescind that, as they will many other policies and regulations that are put into effect. Now, if it's an executive order, Biden can just rescind that with the stroke of a pen. If it's a policy memorandum, the agency can do that, but there's still a process to go through. And then if it's a regulatory action, though, that they want to undo, unless it's an emergency situation, I think these guys are going to be very hesitant to push something through as an interim final regulation. They have to go through the formal regulatory process to undo a regulation. So that's why they've pushed back some of these other ones, and it's going to take them a while to put out the draft regulation to undo or change the other regulation. So this is going to be a work in progress. I do expect on a whole, the business community and the immigrant communities will be fairly pleased, but there certainly will be some bumps in the road. For example, I expect that they will still try to do something on redefining employee-employer relationship, possibly specialty occupation, and those types of things, which is why it's going to be so important that everyone stay engaged and work with and push the administration. The other thing is there certainly will be some missteps. I'm sure everyone on this call saw that President Biden had reversed his past promises with regard to refugee numbers. And just a day or two ago, they announced that they were going to keep the numbers where Trump had put them. That created an immediate backlash, and they're now going to walk that back and probably in May increase the number. The only reason I mention that is we have somebody who I believe appreciates the value that immigrants, refugees, and asylees bring to America, but it's certainly not going to be an open door policy. And we're going to have to stay on top of them to make sure that they do the right thing at the right time.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Stuart, would you say, is there anything else you would want to add about what the Biden administration has been able to accomplish so far with regard to immigration?
Well, Jeff did a great job summarizing many years of immigration policy and the past months. I would say two things. One, I think the Biden administration deserves some credit for the legislation that they put together. I know that the U.S. Citizenship Act is more aspirational because it's, as a body itself, it's unlikely to become law. But if you look at what's in that law, or look in the bill, I mean, essentially what would happen, in addition to some of the legalization aspects for Dreamers and others, on family immigration, you would eliminate the entire backlog of family immigrants and make the categories current. And through that, because of the formula they have, analysis we did showed that in addition to the increases in employment-based immigration that they have and getting rid of the per country limit, that by sharing the family numbers that after about 5 years wouldn't even be needed anymore, you would eventually very quickly get to making the employment-based green card category permanent as well. And they also put in some provisions that are very important to allow students to be able to really potentially go straight to a green card rather than having to go through the H-1B process. And those kind of reforms, a few of those reforms, if they were the only things to become law, would actually make a significant difference for employers. And I would say, as far as looking ahead, the one thing the Biden administration hasn't had a chance to turn to yet, and it's something Angelo had talked about, and about the visa processing. And I had an article on this today in Forbes, if someone wants to check it out, where I talked to many immigration attorneys and talked to companies and reviewed what's happening at the consulates. And it's a real problem. I mean, basically, people can't even get interviews in most places to have a chance to come to the United States. So it's not even as if people say, well, if I wait a certain amount of time, I know I'll be able to eventually get that employee in, or I'll personally be able to come in. At this point, it's just, it's just an abyss that that people are looking at, and that becomes very frustrating for employers and individuals alike.
Karen, Stuart mentioned President Biden's American Citizenship Act that was introduced by Senator Menendez and Congresswoman Sanchez. That is a strong bill. It's an aspirational bill, though. What I would point out in addition to it is we shouldn't ignore Congress just because of that. We have had a couple of bills, other bills introduced also, including one for Dreamers and one for farm workers that have passed the House. And the Senate may or may not take it up. Congresswoman Lofgren and Senator Lee are looking at their per country limit bill again and how to reintroduce that. And on some aspects of immigration, the current chairman of both the Senate Judiciary Committee and the House Judiciary Committee are very strong supporters. So we may see some action in the House and Senate. And I made a plea for everyone, made a comment for everyone to also stay engaged. I would like to do a shout out and thank Rami and his team also for providing some invaluable assistance on a variety of comments that we have submitted, and we're getting ready to submit on different things the administration has done.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And you brought a good point too about some of the partisanship. I don't know if everyone had a chance to see over the weekend, former President George W. Bush has also come out in support of immigration reform and really encouraging the Republican Party to take a good look at serious immigration reform. And so that was a great voice to add in over the weekend for sure. And speaking of the some of the potential changes or enhancements to immigration and the processing and looking at the bills that have been introduced so far. Rami, do you want to touch maybe a little bit more on some of the economic development impacts that some of those things could have? I know this is somewhat prospective, but kind of looking at what the future could look like potentially.
Sure, Karen, and this one here is actually near and dear to me. As you know, I think we worked with you and Steve on, at the time, our sort of secret code name was the Detroit visa. But basically, under the proposed legislation, there will be 10,000 visas per year set aside for a pilot period of 5 years, which allows cities and counties to more or less make decisions and help their employers petition for individuals that will help bring about economic activity and a renaissance. We, as I mentioned earlier, we are an aging country, and actually our flow of immigration has really decreased quite a bit. We're at more or less 80-year lows, I guess, statistically and otherwise. And there are a lot of counties and rural areas or parts of the Midwest where, you know, with Steve starting Global Detroit, and I know that the old sort of Rust Belt, we've lost a lot of people due to, you know, devastation of the industrial base economy that we had, and we're trying to reinvent ourselves. And a lot of it's based on, you know, a knowledge economy. We have great universities, great bones, but we need to attract the right people. And, you know, I mentioned that this would allow cities and states, and I think a lot of Republicans like the whole state control thing, the ability to utilize immigration for, you know, for a renaissance, a reformation of their communities and cities. And these people would have to live and work there. So I was very pleased to see that would be part of it. That would not be counted against the 170,000 employment-based visas that will be available annually. But actually the idea would be to curtail the stagnation of population decline and economics, which is a big issue for something like 60% of the counties across the country, and help equalize the country. A vast number of non-immigrants and immigrants end up on the coasts. I think New York, LA, San Francisco, I think probably Dallas and other major cities receive quite a few. I think Michigan at one point was around 17 in terms of H-1Bs, but this here would be sort of a way to even move outside of Detroit, Ann Arbor, Lansing, and maybe get to other areas that really need these people, like Flint or so. So I think it's an ingenious mechanism to help bring about economic revitalization for Michigan and other other states throughout the country. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Rami. And Angelo, what about for the employers? I know you've done, I think it was a recent blog about the enforcement provisions and some of the issues there. Do you want to talk a little bit about that aspect of the current proposals? Oh, you're still muted, Angelo. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I want to just mention before I do that the program on regional economic development and the immigrant visa pilot that is in the U.S. Citizenship Act that the Biden administration is supporting has a labor certification requirement. And that, to me, was a big disappointment because I had hoped that what would be innovative would be to allow each of the 50 states or subdivisions within the states to have a certain allocation of visa numbers, green card numbers, and that they would use their best judgment in determining who are the best and the brightest, rather than going through the cumbersome labor certification process, which, as we see from the Facebook administrative litigation, has its own issues of potential continuing liability. But under the Title V of the U.S. Citizenship Act, there are a number of employer risks that are nesting within that section that I think reflect the tension between immigrant communities and progressives in the Democratic Party and employers who are sponsoring and want to bring in workers. They make a number of changes to the I-9 and E-Verify process that are quite important in that, for example, the current protections against citizenship status discrimination that apply to a class of protected individuals are now broadened so that everyone is a protected individual. Every non-citizen who seeks to be hired and who is not hired might be termed eligible to file a claim. There is also a change that allows statistics to prove discrimination rather than proof of an intention, a willful intention to discriminate. And so statistics, are sometimes thought of as metrics that can be manipulated to allow for whatever the desired outcome might be proven. And so that is another concern. And in addition, it provides a great deal of protection to non-citizens who may wish to point out what they believe to be workplace violations by the employer during their period of unauthorized employment or even after being hired if there were a path to legalization. But this provides an independent kind of path through the U visa category and through a path to adjustment of status and withholding or deferral of removal, the deportation process, for persons who make what are believed to be good faith workplace claims under every sort of labor and employment law that you can imagine at the federal, state, and local level. So there are risks that these particular changes are going to be off-putting to the employer community and perhaps may be a new source of litigation challenge by employers.
Karen, may I also, and I don't know if someone's going to bring this up, but the other thing that I really like is the fact that I believe 10,000 visas will be set aside for PhDs in STEM fields, which I think is really critical for us. We have to go back and take the lead in technology. I mean, there are reports that China's already researching and publishing more than we are, that they've already taken a big leap in electrical vehicles, autonomous vehicles, as well as artificial intelligence. And I read a statistic, and I think it's 80 to 90% of individuals from China that achieve a PhD and end up staying in the United States, stay here for about 10 years. Obviously, you have an issue of national security that we have to look at, but I think that was a brilliant policy when we did it to the Soviet Union under Reagan, and I really would love to see that as part of this bill. It's at least proposed, and hopefully they'll include it in an overall bill, or at least a sort of a side bill that hopefully can pass through for national security and economic interest of the U.S. Thank you.
Yeah, that is a good point, Rami. Thank you very much. So now we've heard a little bit about kind of some of the impacts that we've had over the last few years, some of the work that the Biden administration's been doing, and some work that they hope to do. Jeff, would you mind just kind of touching upon for us and highlighting some of the folks that the White House has put in place in terms of their prior immigration-related experience and kind of what that means for the work?
Sure. Thanks, Karen. So the Trump administration, I would say most of us would argue, was marked by having people who were either xenophobic or incompetent on the immigration issues. This administration is bringing in people with very deep expertise and years, if not decades of experience. And experience not only dealing with immigrant communities, immigration law, but also in the policy world. In the White House, they brought in Tyler Moran and Esther Oliveira. Esther actually worked with Stewart on the Senate Immigration Subcommittee back when Stewart was with Senator Abraham, and Esther was with Senator Kennedy. But she came out of the Miami immigrant community. Tyler has been inside the administration in the past. She was running the immigration hub during the Trump administration. She had been with Senator Menendez. She had been with Congressman Gutierrez, etc. Just nominated to be director of USCIS is Jardot. Was chief counsel At USCIS, she also ran the Immigration Subcommittee for Congresswoman Lofgren, among other things. David Shahulian, who had been Deputy Chief Counsel at DHS and ran the Immigration Subcommittee as well after is Deputy Chief Counsel for DHS in charge of the immigration portfolio. He's Assistant Secretary for Policy Planning and Strategy. So he's building out a lot of this. He brought over Gary Merson to be his deputy. Gary's been on the Hill. Gary was the ombudsman at DHS. He's been in the agency. Felicia Escobar is the chief of staff for USCIS. Felicia was President Obama's top immigration staffer in the White House. And of course, we've got Ali Mayorkas on the top, who ran the agency, ran USCIS, and was Deputy Secretary of DHS. And those are just a few of the people that they brought in already, and they're continuing to build out the team. So I'm encouraged by it. And even more than that, I'd say it's a team that's experienced, and it's a team that business and advocates and opponents can have a conversation with. We've been denied that opportunity during the last administration. They're further behind at DOL, building out that team at ETA. But I'd like to believe that we're going to see similar levels of competence coming in there as well.
Yeah, it really is, been a great group, like you said, with some experience, and which I think is really helpful, especially given a lot of the work that needs to be done, and just understanding how some of the systems work and where some of the fixes might need to be, et cetera. So that's great. So we've talked a lot about the legislation and kind of policy. So Suzanne, I'd like to turn to you and even talk just more broadly about how do universities and companies kind of fit into these opportunities around global talent?
Thank you. It's been a great discussion. So universities and companies are absolutely front and center here. So, we make the environment more welcoming, and then universities are here to obviously attract the students, right? They need to be thinking about how are they positioning themselves, not just locally, but internationally, to compete with students that really can choose to go anywhere in the US to study. And so it's everything from what are they highlighting on their websites? And then once the students get here, how are they helping them make sure to prepare for jobs in the US? We work very closely with our university partners to hold webinars that give these international students who don't understand the importance of things that we take for granted, like networking. That's foreign to them. That's not something that they typically do or rely on. So we constantly hold webinars where we're saying to them, this is what networking is, this is how it looks, this is why it's important. And so for some cultural, there are some cultural differences in maybe the Asian communities where they're a little bit more reserved, and that sort of outgoing manner that employers like to see is not necessarily what they're comfortable with. So it's a lot of training and hand-holding and letting them know that there are resources that can help them prepare. We talk to students about learning how to become irresistible to employers, and what does that mean? And and again, it's knowing about making small talk and really just helping them highlight what their skills are. We at the Mosaic Project right now have the benefit of working. We have 2 international students who are our interns, and it's been such a treat. And I was talking with one of the students who is from Spain, and I asked him, why did you choose to come to Lindenwood University here in St. Louis? And he had been recruited by schools in Utah and New Mexico, et cetera. What he said to me was, I wanted to see where there was a sizable population of Spanish students. So, again, that university, he knew that there were a lot of Spaniards studying there. That was something that made him comfortable in coming here. So how are universities, again, amplifying that they are international and that they have that in built-in support system? And then from the company perspective, it's also, how are they finding the talent? Are they partnering with organizations in their communities that that are the conduits to the high skilled and middle skilled and low skilled talent? Again, we have a program of ambassador companies where, you know, it's interesting, when we first started the Mosaic Project, and we have this ambassador company program that's of no cost, but the companies were aligning with our mission from the perspective of it being good for community outreach, right? So that sort of mission aligned with an internal corporate relations or community outreach department. Now, a lot of the contacts that we have at these companies are people in HR, because diversity hiring, and of course, DEI is the name of the game right now. And so again, it's about matchmaking and connecting. Where is that talent? And then it goes back to, again, just to go back to the students for a second, is making sure they know when they should be lining up their OPT. Who are the companies that are going to be interested in taking them on for that, or CPT? You know, the other, I guess, player in this is also the community, and not to, you know, not to forget about that. You've got ethnic chambers that are also conduits of talent. You know, often, I remember one time I posted something on LinkedIn about being Colombian, and somebody replied to me and said, oh, I need to connect you with this woman. She's my neighbor. She was an engineer in Colombia, and now she's teaching English because she has no idea how to match her skills. And so, you know, it's that sort of thing. They know that they can come to us, we can match them with somebody in their industry. It's a lot of, as I said earlier, sort of deliberate, intentional, and long-term connections, and just working together and making sure that in general, the community, the city, the town is consistently demonstrating how they are welcoming the success stories of immigrants that have come, you know, the business owners that are immigrants that have had success. So it's really, again, it takes a village, and it's just a lot of collaboration and comprehensive approach.
Yeah, for sure, Suzanne. And you all at St. Louis Mosaic are doing some amazing work around global talent, and trying to kind of, like you said, do that matchmaking and networking for the global talent with the international students and companies. Stuart, what about you in terms of what's your perspective on kind of how the international students and companies kind of fit into this global talent picture?
Well, I think what Suzanne's doing is great, because I can only imagine any of us as foreign students in another country. I know I studied for a time in another country in college and graduate school, and the idea of navigating through that country's immigration system would have been quite, you know, I wouldn't even have known where to have started. So, you know, so I think sometimes we need to put ourselves in the shoes of people who are coming here to another country, even if their English language skills are strong. You know, how challenging it would be. I would say the big picture is that while there was great and terrible economic dislocation because of the pandemic, as well as other terrible impacts in the tech community and for tech jobs, that really wasn't really the case. Our research that was cited and a number of times by judges against some of the proclamations that Angelo and Rami talked about had shown that the unemployment rate in computer occupations actually declined. You know, during the time period when the Trump administration had claimed that they needed to put these proclamations on to protect jobs from H-1B visa holders and others. And so what we've seen today is a continued decline in the unemployment rate, basically under 2% for computer and math occupations, according to the latest data. And we've been tracking unfilled positions, job vacancies that are posted. And the numbers are well over 1 million in computer occupations, just in computer occupations. We're not talking about all types of jobs in the countries. We're talking about just in the types of jobs that someone applying for an H-1B visa would would attempt to fill. And so employers are going to have a continued problem, because even in the best of days for employment-based immigration that we can imagine in the coming years, no one's really talked about increasing the number of H-1B visas. The questions are probably going to continue to be, will there be new restrictions on H-1B visas? And I think employers would hope that something would pass that would at least relieve some of the pressure via the green card route. Rami talked about an exemption for people with PhDs in STEM fields. Hopefully people can be even more ambitious, and why not have that exemption for masters and above? I mean, that would be quite a competitive advantage for the United States if we want to start competing with some of the other countries for international students.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Stuart. And I would be remiss not to also mention Global Detroit's Global Talent Retention Initiative program, and Guito Wang, who runs that program. They do a lot of work around the international student retention piece. And to your point, Stuart, and to Rami's comment about potentially offering specific pathways for some STEM students, I think would be really beneficial. I know definitely here in Southeast Michigan, that could be a good opportunity for us. So now that we've kind of looked at the legislation, the policy, and also kind of that big picture of how our international students and our companies and organizations can fit into this global talent picture, Angelo, what should companies be thinking about as they look to hire global talent?
Well, I would divide this into two segments. One is advocacy. Just today, USCIS has invited public comment. Actually, the Department of Homeland Security has invited public comment on USCIS policies. And there are a number of things that could be changed without promulgating regulations through policy memoranda. They could, for example, clarify, streamline, and make more open and available the extraordinary ability category for first preference immigrants who wish to come. They could declare that it is in the national interest and therefore allow expansion of the national interest waiver for second preference categories. They could, in one fell swoop, modify Schedule A group classifications, which now cover physical therapists and nurses and a limited number of persons of exceptional ability. They could open those up. And in addition, I might mention that when Secretary Mayorkas was the director of USCIS, he did quite a bit about establishing an entrepreneur in residence program, and that should be reawakened because that brought real-time business leaders into the agency to explain to the adjudicators how the world works and why it is not unreasonable for a company to start in a garage, which many of our American legends have done in their histories. And so those are things that can be done on an advocacy plane. But there should also be a precautionary set of steps around recruiting, around hiring, around the I-9 and E-Verify compliance space that will avoid the kind of trouble that Facebook is encountering in the administrative litigation I mentioned before. The old rules seem to be shifting, and what was considered settled and not well understood is now open for discussion. And so employers, beyond taking precautions in how they structure their programs, would want to be prepared to defend themselves in litigation or to pursue affirmative litigation in their own right, whether through their own direct suits or through trade groups and chambers of commerce and business groups. So I would encourage that they think very broadly about how they can make this system work. And the one thing that we know is that there has been an exhaustion level among the agencies in defending against Trump-era immigration regulations and policies. And I think there is a certain hesitancy to get embroiled in litigation. So why not adopt welcoming policies? On the other side of that, though, is Stephen Miller has set up some sort of a litigation unit to attack from the right. So it will be an interesting time.
Thanks, Angelo. Rami, is there anything you would want to add about kind of what companies should be thinking about as they look to hire global talent?
Certainly. Obviously, national security, I think it's going to be more and more difficult even under the Biden administration, unfortunately, with China and maybe some other countries. That may be a little bit of a sensitive issue here. But I also feel that you want to look at a situation where we're establishing a pipeline of individuals. So if a university has access to foreign nationals and they have the possibility of working in the United States, that's going to set us up for an ongoing wave of talented individuals. So if I were an employer, I would make sure that I really connect well with at least 3 or 4 universities and make sure that we have a very strong presence and sort of commit to them that, we're there to accept your foreign students. A lot of companies still shy away. I see that quite a bit in the Midwest, actually, where it's still it's politically incorrect to seek foreign talent, where we don't see that in Silicon Valley or Austin or Boston, which is just given business. So for large corporations, establish very good relations with universities and be proactive. And this can be an ongoing recruitment tool for you if you put in the time and commitment for it. So yeah, that's
a great point, Rami. Especially those partnerships with universities. I agree. Those can be really beneficial to companies for sure. So we're about to wrap down with our kind of panel discussion here. So just a reminder to please go ahead and put some questions in the chat. I'm going to start off, first of all, and this is kind of open to whoever might want to take it, but does anyone have an idea of what the prognosis is for getting the foreign consulates open and people starting to be processed? Is there any expectation that this is going to start happening anytime soon?
I can comment on that. The State Department during the Trump era had developed something called Diplomacy Strong, which was a 5-level of analysis of the severity of the COVID risk in the particular home country where a U.S. consulate post might be situated. And increasingly, what we have found is that in some places the risk is very low, yet the inability to come is still very high. China, for example, has dramatically reduced its experience with COVID, and yet one of the national interest exceptions that would preclude a visa appointment or a visa issuance is still in place. That was renewed by the Biden administration. I think what people need to do is to understand how to go about requesting an emergency interview and have a good reason to do so, because there are places where that will be heard. There is the form that's online, the non-immigrant visa application form, the DS-160, which gives a box to request an expedited interview. And that can be a tremendous way to move things forward. At the same time, there are external facing email addresses for the visa units of the various consulates. And Rami and I could provide those on a case-by-case basis because we don't want the consular post flooded with emails, but those could together, the request for expedited interview through the application online and an online email to the consular post might make some headway. But we're seeing that litigation is likely to change things again because the courts have been riding roughshod over the Department of State for its refusal to open consular posts at a predictable pace. And there's one other thing that could be done, and that is the State Department could relax its requirement for in-person attendance at visa interviews, and do visa reissuance by mail, even for persons in the United States, which is something that we old-timers know used to exist. And so those are some of the things that would ease the burden.
Yeah, that good old process. You could send your passport to the Department of State and get a visa renewal right here in the country. That was a long time ago. I remember those days though. So, okay. So yeah.
Aaron, I would just add that, you know, as Jeff alluded to the many different issues that the Biden administration is handling right now. But I mean, what really needs to happen is this issue on visa processing needs to become a priority. I mean, people need to view it as that this is a problem and we need to address it. There's wide authority to in the statute on in-person interviews. The article I wrote today talked about how you could, you know, why not, you know, Zoom should be able to be used. That would relieve some of the problems. But also there's a real illogic in the current policies that hopefully will eventually lead to them being abandoned. I mean, right now, for example, in Europe, an international student can get a visa and come to the United States, but even then they have to have shown that they have a negative test for COVID under CDC guidelines. So then why does it make sense for someone who's an H-1B or an L manager not be able to get a visa for COVID reasons when they would, if they got the visa, they would also have to show that they either had COVID recently or had a negative test. So the policies really don't make any sense if you know, with the almost mildest form of scrutiny, and anyone asked a couple of questions about these policies. And so you hope at some point that will, you know, that will take precedence and that there'll start to be more changes in the policies.
That's a really good point, Stuart. And just a quick note for folks, again, we will be sending out some resources, including links to a number of Stuart's articles, as well as other resources to everyone. We're also going to be including the information about how you could provide comments to the USCIS that Angelo had just mentioned about the opening that has come up to be able to provide comments to procedures and policies around USCIS. But thinking about you know, maybe providing urgency to the visa processing issue. We do have a question in the chat about when do we think the Biden's team will turn to these immigration visa issues since the border issues persist? Do we think it's going to be 6 months from now, more than that? Maybe they'll try and do things simultaneously. I mean, and we do know the crisis at the border has definitely been taking a lot of attention, but we also know there's other you know, other matters that really need to be addressed. Anyone have any thoughts on when the Biden administration may turn to look at that?
Well,
Rami? Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
I normally call Jeff on something.
Are looking at it. They've begun to. One of the reasons why David Chihulian brought Gary Merson over was to focus solely on these issues and to drive them through the agency. You also do have engagement from the other agencies in the White House on this too. So it's divided attention, not a lack of attention.
That's a good comment. Good thought.
I would just add, though, that we ought to remember the lesson of the Obama administration, which was it took a long time to focus on legal immigration and also on dreamers. And ultimately, legislation was never passed and regulations were delayed to the 11th hour. So I think they can walk and chew gum at the same time, and I really do think they should hustle because we don't know what's going to happen with the midterms.
True. Very good point, Angelo. Our next question is, would you please share your thoughts about how we can encourage small and mid-sized employers to consider using employment-based immigration? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Well, Karen, you know, peanut gallery comment. I'd say the type of work that you and Suzanne Steve and such do is exactly what's needed, because there's so many SMBs that just don't even understand the possibility of tapping into this talent pool, or they think that it's too complicated, too expensive, or there are political risks to be considered. The type of educational efforts that you're doing and others in the communities can do are exactly what's needed to spread the word that people should look at this talent.
And that's what I was gonna say too, Jeff, is the education piece. And I know, we've partnered with Rami a lot at the state, and I know Steve through Global Detroit has partnered a lot with Rami and his team to really try and educate employers and kind of demystify the immigration process and help them understand that there are different options out there that might be available to them to utilize. I spent 20 years in law firms, and I will actually say we saw a number of small and mid-sized employers who utilized immigration, because it's also about, to Suzanne's comments, those needs for talent and being open to looking for talent in many different ways, in many different places. And I don't know if anyone else has anything to add on that part, but is there any other ways folks think about to kind of encourage those small and mid-sized employers in the global talent space?
Karen, my experience is the larger chambers, of course, with the U.S. Chamber, as well as say the Detroit Chamber and others, tend to attract mid-sized and larger companies. But I think maybe reaching out to chambers in rural areas and other counties where there are many more, or proportionally, there are larger segment of small businesses and maybe mid-sized businesses that are not quite as acquainted with immigration, and sort of educating them through the chambers. And if they see other employers are utilizing this tool, I think they'll probably be prone to utilizing it as well. So I just pushing it through the business community, I think, is probably a very good idea. And I'm just wondering, assuming this bill precedes the 10,000 economic visas that will be allowed for areas where there's stagnation, I'm just curious to see how they're going to quite administer that. And Angelo mentioned a labor certification, which I agree with Angelo, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. But a lot of smaller and mid-sized companies are struggling for talent and really need people. And so, as Jeff mentioned, for them to ignore this pool of talent is really, I think, a disadvantage for them. Especially with everything else that we see going on in the country in general, in terms of number of retirements and aging population, et cetera. So I think just pushing it through business communities on a smaller chamber of commerce level, the work that you guys are doing as well, as Stuart had mentioned as well.
And Suzanne, what are you seeing in the St. Louis area in terms of small and mid-sized employers? Are they seeming open, or is there education you feel like you're doing that's helping?
Yeah, I do absolutely think they're open. Again, they're in some cases the smaller to mid-sized companies are more nimble. I mean, with some of the bigger companies too, there's the issue of, for full sponsorship, who's going to pay for that, and you have the hiring manager, and so it's different internal teams that need to sort of weigh in on what's going to happen from that perspective. But I think I just reinforced that it's the demystifying that it's actually not that hard to do. There are people that can walk you through it. Maybe folks, companies can try out talent again with an international student or a project. So yeah, just reiterating, again, it's all about communicating broadly, not just to ourselves, but, using the papers and social media to again, just amplify why it makes sense, why diversity, really diversity is such, it's not just a buzzword. I think it's here to stay for a little bit, but international talent can absolutely address that need.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So what is the likelihood of individual bills moving forward around immigration as comprehensive immigration reform might linger? Anyone want to touch base on that? And I know the Biden administration said they'd be open to that as well, but does anyone have any thoughts on what, if the individual bills might be moving forward a little bit faster paced than anything comprehensive, or might have any thoughts on that?
Karen, great question. I think we'll continue to see some bills considered and passed through the House. I would say that the likelihood that anything goes through the Senate is even more remote than last year, given the situation on the southern border and some of the politics around that. There are some in the advocacy community and some in the Democratic Party that would like to tuck immigration provisions into the infrastructure bill or something else like that, using the process called reconciliation, which allows the majority to pass something with a sheer majority as opposed to needing the 60 votes to overcome a filibuster. But for a variety of procedural rules, I'm one of those who believes that immigration reform cannot fit into a reconciliation package. You know, Stuart or some of my other colleagues may have a different opinion, but I just don't see any sort of broad immigration bill moving through the House and Senate. You know, there are obviously some niche bills that could move conceivably, but the problem that we always face is those gain momentum, there are others who would like to attach their provisions to those bills as well. So the politics become more difficult. We saw that last year with the per country limit bill. It was a bill that passed the House, something like 365 to 65. When it went to the Senate, it came to a halting stop because there were other senators that wanted to include provisions on H-1B, farm workers, and other things.
Stuart, do you want to touch on that at all? What were your
Well,
thoughts
I
on
think
how that would move?
I think Jeff is correct. I think that I think there will be a serious consideration of looking at the reconciliation process. You know, when I've talked to staffers, you know, they don't know the rules 100% either, and so everyone is trying to guess. But essentially, you know, if something is shown to have a budget impact, there's at least a chance it could be included in reconciliation. And since immigration does have a budget impact in some form, it doesn't necessarily have to be even a positive impact, which is kind of the interesting thing. People used to think of this as, you know, the old scoring issue of something has to balance out. But as we see with the deficits continuing to climb in Washington, then balancing the budget isn't, or even balancing particular bills isn't really the issue. So the rules are more arcane in this case. And I do think there will be a possibility of trying to do that. I mean, the other issue actually is that the majorities aren't very big for the Democrats. So all it takes in the Senate is one person saying, I don't agree with that. In the House, it just takes a couple of people saying, I don't agree with including this or that measure or doing it that way. So that's an additional problem beyond what Jeff talked about in terms of, you know, what the parliamentarian might say.
I might note that last term, there was an immigration-related rider that passed along with the Consolidated Appropriations Bill that increased filing fees for premium processing services. And that sort of illustrates Stuart's and Jeff's point that if there is some budgetary impact or consequence, there could be some hope for success using reconciliation.
And actually kind of tying into this question, and Stuart, I might start with you, is we have a question in the chat about outside of immigration specific bills, might there be opportunities to advance some immigration policy through other bills like related to infrastructure or something else?
Again, it's always possible. I mean, I personally think that, you know, it's kind of crazy, all these bills that people will be talking about with competitiveness, that they wouldn't include something related to immigration. It would be typical of Congress to include everything but possibly the most important thing. but in this case, you know, it's something we may end up seeing. I mean, there's talk about you know, giving the National Science Foundation extra authority, extra budget authority, directing plans. And as employers would tell you, that if they don't have the people to do the work and to do the research, It doesn't matter whether they get extra money or the community even gets extra money from the National Science Foundation. You need actual people to come up with the ideas, and the people often implement the ideas through startups. And so one of the bills that people need to be looking at is a startup visa bill, because when you've looked at artificial intelligence and some of these other areas, you've seen a lot of immigrants have made advances. And a typical way that someone takes innovation is not just to develop it for a big company, but to take the idea that they've been thinking about, and when they finally get the opportunity, they start their own business, and then use that technology, as we're seeing today with Zoom, which has been alluded to before. It wasn't developed for another company. It was developed by the entrepreneur because that's, that way he got to control it.
Karen, let me break that question down into two pieces. One, it certainly is possible that something can move as part of a broader bill. In fact, the majority of major immigration legislative victories have happened as they've tucked those provisions into a consolidated appropriations bill or something else like that. So I'm sure advocates, including myself, will continue to push for that type of thing as we go through this year. The second part is, since infrastructure was specifically mentioned, you have to consider the process under which the bill will be considered. Infrastructure will be considered under reconciliation. So there you fall into those funky rules over what can go under reconciliation and not. And as Stuart said, does it have the budgetary impact? So the answer is yes, something can happen as part of something else. But then the second part is you have to look at the process by which that bill might move.
I would like to add too, as at the U.S. Conference of Mayors and others, I think mayors are playing a bigger role on a national basis. And ironically, there's more bipartisanship there as well. A lot of them, I think, understand, whether they're far right or far left, the benefits of immigrants in most cases. And I think the vast majority of them, similar to what they're doing with the infrastructure bill, may advocate for this, and then of course push their local representatives, both in the House as well as the Senate, to support a national comprehensive immigration bill. So I think with Global Detroit and some of the other things, some of the other organizations, I'm sorry, that we have around the Midwest and others, I think just continuing to meet with our local political leaders and asking them to speak out, and reminding our federal elected officials to push for this may make hopefully some political headway. I know it's very, very divisive right now, and it's remarkable that senators like Senator Cruz, who were part of I think the group of 8 and helped write some of some pretty good ideas for comprehensive immigration reform, are now all against it. I don't know how you overcome that, but even in deep red states, you do find mayors and others that are very tolerant, in fact advocate for it. So hopefully, just push it back to the local level maybe, and have them try to influence federal.
And Karen, if I could just add, I got a private question that asked if corporations are hesitant to get involved in the current litigious environment, what support is available for states and local governments to move welcoming policies forward? And what I have seen in history teaching is that case studies are extremely powerful, and they may or may not have a name and a company attached to them, but they show the engine that legal immigration, employment-based immigration, investor-based immigration can promote. And so they should be trying to develop as many case studies and bringing those to the attention of administrative agency officials and in Congress.
And if they are unwilling or unable for some reason to bring those examples forward themselves, I'd encourage them to bring them to Rami, Angelo, the others on the call, because they're aggregators and we can all bring this stuff up. It's like the litigation we were talking about before. They were filed on behalf of the Chamber, National Association of Manufacturers, and other trade associations. And it was their members who benefited from the actions of the courts there.
Well, I would say too, Angelo, just in terms of states, I mean, that's what our office does. I mean, we're a state level office that supports immigrant and refugee integration, and we try to create a more welcoming environment here within the state of Michigan and every day in what we do. And we strive to make more equitable access to state level services and programming. So, you know, I mean, there definitely are states out there that are trying to move forward the needle when it comes to welcoming policies. We've got just a few minutes left, but one question that really actually does kind of hit home, especially given the audience that we have, and a lot of the folks that have joined us today are from the Heartland or from the Rust Belt region. You know, what's needed to break this logjam in Congress? And is there anything that business or industry or other groups within our region can do to help break that logjam up? You want to take a jump at that one?
Well, if there is a West Virginia Development Corporation, they should be talking to Senator Manchin, and the corresponding one in Arizona should be talking to Senator Kristen Sinema in order to try and create a larger majority or a more effective majority in Congress to do these things.
Stuart or Jeff or Rami, any?
Yeah, well, I'd take that further and just encourage them to speak to their elected officials in general, because we do have some supporters of employment-based immigration on both sides. We also have detractors on both sides. I mean, take Senator Durbin, who is chair of the Senate Immigration Committee. He is a huge advocate for certain aspects of immigration. He's also one of the biggest opponents of the H-1B program up there. So we need to work both sides of the aisle that way.
Exactly. And I know we found too, you know, really, you know, we try and focus some of our work on what's going to be impactful. Obviously, it's from the state perspective. We can extrapolate this to the federal perspective, but around things like, you know, farm workers, you know, where are there congressional districts or senators who have, you know, larger numbers of farm workers where it really impacts their economy, and how do we, you know, how do we make sure that those voices are heard, and that your congressional delegation is listening to those voices, right? So thinking about what impacts your congressional district, your state, and then, you know, going to your local congressperson or your senator to really have those conversations. Because it really puts it kind of hits home for them.
Karen, if I can just add, unfortunately, I think that the argument was controlled from the White House for 4 years, and it created this notion that if you let immigrants in, skilled or unskilled, it's somehow going to take jobs away from Americans, or they're going to be poorer as a result, or they're going to need government assistance. And that is absolutely wrong. Time after time, study after study, et cetera. And I think we need to, you know, push out these studies and demonstrate. I mean, here in Michigan, I'm going to refer to just say Dearborn or Hamtramck, and how immigrants have really taken ghost towns and turned them into vibrant areas, really without government assistance. And I'm sure that's happened all over the country. And so I think we need to stand up and dispel the notion that somehow U.S. workers or citizens are going to be hurt. I think it's going to help the U.S. and help create more jobs. There are all sorts of, I know Stuart does a lot of publishing on this, but we need to start finding venues where we can share this, more editorials in newspapers, et cetera, because again, I think it has, the level of disinformation is remarkable out there. And I think we need to start at that level, on the individual level.
Good point, Ronnie, for sure. Well, we're about 1 minute to time, so I just want to thank our panelists, give a big thank you to our panelists and all of our sponsors today, as well as everyone who was able to attend. We hope you found this to be really informative and insightful. I know I did. We'll be following up today by sending all attendees a recording of the webinar, the list of resources that we've mentioned, as well as sending the information about how to provide comments again to the USCIS, which was mentioned earlier. Thanks again, and we hope that everyone has a great rest of their afternoon.